Some truths don't disappear. They wait until you're ready to be destroyed by them. I didn't remember her face. Not clearly, not anymore. Just fragments that came and went like reflections in broken glass. A pair of eyes in the rain. A hand slipping from mine. The sound of sirens somewhere far behind us. And for 5 years I told myself it didn't matter, because in my world people disappeared all the time, and you learn not to look back. But memory has a way of choosing its own moment. And mine came tonight under crystal chandeliers and soft violin music at a charity gala in Midtown Manhattan, where everything smelled like expensive perfume and polished marble, where people laughed too easily and pretended power was something you could wear instead of something that lived in your bones. I stood there with a glass of whiskey I hadn't touched, listening to conversations I didn't care about, when the room shifted, not loudly, not obviously, just enough for instinct to catch it before logic did. 2 boys walked past me, no more than 5 years old, dressed too well for their age, moving with a quiet confidence that didn't belong to children, and something inside me went still, the kind of stillness that comes before recognition, before impact. I told myself it was nothing, just another pair of kids dragged into a world they didn't understand, but then one of them turned his head slightly, and I saw his eyes, gray-blue, sharp, observant, too aware. And my grip tightened around the glass without me realizing it, because I had seen those eyes before. I had seen them every time I looked in a mirror. I should have looked away. I didn't. I followed them with my gaze as they stopped near a table, whispering to each other, and that's when I noticed the necklace, a thin silver chain resting against the collar of the smaller boy. Simple, almost forgettable, except it wasn't, because my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the room or the air or the people around me. It was memory, sharp and sudden, cutting through years of silence. I was moving before I decided to, stepping toward them, each step measured, controlled, like I could outrun the feeling if I kept it contained. I crouched down in front of them, ignoring the way the room seemed to fade into background noise, my voice low, steady. "Where did you get that necklace?" The boy looked at me, really looked at me. Not scared, not confused, just certain, and for a second I forgot how to breathe because there was something in his expression that felt like recognition, like he knew something I didn't. "My mom gave it to me," he said, simple, direct, and I nodded once, like that answered anything at all. But it didn't. It made everything worse, because there was only one woman I had ever seen wearing that exact necklace, and she wasn't supposed to exist anymore. I stood up slowly, my mind already moving ahead of me, pulling threads, connecting pieces I hadn't even realized were still there. 5 years ago, a storm, a disappearance I never questioned because I chose not to, because in my world not asking was survival, but now the past was standing in front of me in the form of 2 boys, with my eyes and her memory wrapped around their neck, and for the first time in a long time, something slipped through my control, not fear, not yet, but something close enough to make my pulse slow and heavy, because if they were connected to her, if she was still out there, then the truth I buried wasn't gone, it was waiting, and I had just walked straight into it. The rest of the night moved without me, conversations rising and falling like distant waves while I stood there watching those 2 boys as if they were the only real thing in the room, and I could feel it now, that slow, deliberate pull of something I had ignored for years, something I had buried under decisions that were easier not to question. I turned slightly, already reaching for my phone, not because I needed confirmation, but because I needed control, and control starts with information. Always. I stepped away from the crowd, into a quieter hallway lined with polished mirrors and soft golden light, the kind that makes everything look calm even when it is not. My reflection stared back at me, composed, steady, unchanged, but my mind was moving too fast beneath it. I dialed a number I had not used in months, and it picked up on the first ring. "I need everything on a woman named Lily Carter," I said, my voice even, controlled, the way it always was when something mattered. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, then a quiet, "Understood." And the line went dead, no questions, no hesitation. That was how my world worked, but tonight it did not feel like enough. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and leaned one hand against the cool marble wall, closing my eyes for a second longer than necessary, because the memory was not coming in fragments anymore. It was sharpening, filling in the gaps I had left untouched. The rain, the sound of tires on wet pavement, her voice, softer than it should have been in a moment like that. And the necklace, always the necklace, silver, simple, impossible to forget once you had seen it twice. I opened my eyes and pushed away from the wall, stepping back into the main ballroom just as the music shifted into something slower, more deliberate. People were dancing now, laughing, unaware, and I scanned the room until I found them again, but they were not alone this time. A woman stood a few feet behind them, partially turned away, speaking to someone I could not see, her posture guarded but composed, like someone who had learned how to exist without drawing attention, and something in my chest tightened again. Not recognition, not yet, but something close enough to make me stop where I was. I should have walked over, I should have ended the distance between us in seconds, but instinct held me back, not caution, something deeper, something that felt like the edge of a truth I was not ready to face all at once. So I watched instead, the way I always did before making a move, the way I had been trained to do, and as she turned slightly, just enough for the light to catch her profile, the world did something I had not experienced in years. It slowed, not dramatically, not like in stories, just enough for me to notice the details I would have missed otherwise. The curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell just past her shoulders, the stillness in the way she held herself, and then her hand lifted to adjust the collar of one of the boys. And I saw it, the same movement, the same quiet care I had not realized I remembered until that exact second, and my breath caught, not sharply, not visibly, but enough to break the rhythm I had kept for 5 years, because I knew then, before I saw her face fully, before she turned toward me, before anything else could confirm it, I knew that she had not disappeared from the world. She had disappeared from me, and that was a very different truth. She turned, and for a moment the entire room disappeared, not because it actually changed, but because my mind refused to register anything except her, Lily Carter, standing less than 20 feet away from me as if 5 years had not passed, as if the version of her I had locked away in memory had simply stepped out into the present without warning. Her eyes met mine, and there it was, not surprise, not fear, something steadier, something that told me she had already seen me, already known I was here, and that realization hit harder than anything else, because it meant this was not an accident. Not entirely. I took one step forward, then another, slow, deliberate. The way you approach something fragile without admitting that it might break. The crowd shifted around me, voices rising and falling, but none of it reached me, not anymore. I stopped a few feet in front of her, close enough to see the details clearly now. The faint lines of exhaustion she could not completely hide, the quiet strength in the way she held her shoulders, and the absence of anything that resembled the girl I used to remember. This version of her was different, sharper, like she had learned how to survive without asking anyone for permission. Lily, I said, and even my own voice sounded unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone who was not entirely certain of what came next. Her lips pressed together for a brief second before she exhaled slowly, controlled. You should not say my name here, she replied, her tone calm but firm, not cold, not distant, just careful, and that single word carried more distance than silence ever could. I glanced past her toward the boys, Ethan and Noah. I did not know their names yet, but I knew enough. They were watching us now, quiet, observant, the same way I had always been, and something in my chest tightened again. Not confusion anymore, something heavier, something that felt like responsibility arriving all at once without warning. They are mine, I said quietly, not a question, not an accusation, just a statement that had already rooted itself in truth before I spoke it. Lily's expression did not change, but her eyes did, just slightly, a flicker of something that could have been confirmation. Or could have been regret. You do not get to decide that, she answered, her voice still even, but there was something underneath it now, something guarded and unyielding. I took a breath, steadying myself in a way I had not needed to do in years. 5 years, I said, my gaze locked on hers. You disappeared without a word, and as soon as the sentence left me, I knew it was wrong, not factually but emotionally, because the way she looked at me then, the way her expression shifted just enough to reveal something deeper, something that had been waiting, told me there was more to that story than I had ever allowed myself to consider. I did not disappear, she said quietly, and for the first time, There was something sharp in her voice. Not anger. Not exactly, but truth. Direct and unavoidable. "I left," she continued, and the space between those two words settled heavily in the air between us. I felt it then. The shift. The moment where control stopped being enough. Where answers mattered more than power, because whatever I thought I knew about that night, about her, about the choices that led to this moment, it was incomplete, and for the first time in a long time, I realized I had not been the one in control of the truth. I had just been the one avoiding it. The words stayed with me longer than anything else she had said, not disappeared, left. And the difference between those two things was not small. It was everything, because disappearing meant something had been taken from you. But leaving meant you had made a choice, and I had never considered that possibility. Not once in 5 years. I studied her face, searching for something I could recognize, something I could use to rebuild the version of the past I had carried with me. But she did not give me that. She did not soften, did not explain. She simply stood there like she had already made peace with whatever truth I was still trying to reach. "You left," I repeated quietly, testing the weight of it, and she nodded once, slow, deliberate, like she was confirming something I should have understood long ago. "I had to," she said. And there it was again. Another sentence that sounded simple, but carried something heavier underneath, something unresolved. I exhaled slowly, my jaw tightening just enough to betray the control I was holding on to. "You had a choice," I said, and even as I spoke, I knew it sounded incomplete, because choices do not exist in isolation. They exist because of something else, something that pushes you toward them, and the way her eyes shifted told me she heard the same thing in my words that I did. "So did you," she replied, and that stopped me, not because of the words themselves, but because of the certainty behind them, the quiet conviction that did not need to be raised to be felt. I frowned slightly, the pieces not fitting together the way they should have. "I never gave you a reason to run," I said, and this time it was not control that spoke. It was confusion, real and unfiltered, because in my mind, I had never been the threat. I had been the one who stayed, the one who protected what mattered. But Lily's expression changed then, just enough to make something shift in the air between us. Not anger, not bitterness, something steadier, something more final. "That is the problem," she said softly, and for the first time, her voice carried something close to emotion. Not loud, not overwhelming, but present, undeniable. "You did not even know you did." The sentence landed without force, but it did not need it, because the implication behind it moved faster than my ability to process it. I felt it then, that subtle fracture in the version of events I had trusted for years, the possibility that there was something I had missed, something I had not seen because I never thought to look. I glanced toward the boys again, both of them watching us with that same quiet awareness, and I realized something else at the same time. Lily had not just left me. She had taken everything that connected us and built a life without me in it, without my knowledge, without my permission, and yet, standing here now, there was no fear in her posture, no hesitation in the way she held her ground, only certainty, the kind that comes from surviving something and deciding you will not go back to it. I looked back at her, my voice lower now, more deliberate. "Then tell me," I said, because control was no longer enough, and for the first time in years, I needed the truth more than I needed to be right. "What did I do?" And the silence that followed was not empty, it was full of everything she had not said yet, everything that had been waiting for this exact moment to be spoken. She did not answer right away, and that silence stretched between us in a way that felt heavier than anything she could have said, because I could see it in her eyes, the decision forming, the line between what she had kept buried and what she was about to reveal, and for the first time since I had seen her again, I understood that whatever came next was not going to restore anything, it was going to change it, permanently. Lily glanced toward the boys, her gaze softening for just a fraction of a second before she looked back at me, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, controlled, but underneath it was something that had been carried for too long. 5 years ago, she began, and the words immediately pulled me back, not to a clear memory, but to the edges of one, the storm, the urgency, the decisions made too quickly to question. "You gave an order," she continued, and my jaw tightened slightly, not because I did not believe her, but because in my world, orders were constant. necessary and rarely personal. I gave a lot of orders, I said quietly, and she nodded once, like she expected that answer, like she had already accounted for it. This one was, she replied, and something in the way she said it made my chest feel heavier, like the air had shifted without warning. I frowned, searching for something specific, something I could place, but the memory would not come fully into focus. It stayed just out of reach, incomplete. There was a name, she said, her eyes locked on mine now, unflinching. A woman you were told was a problem, someone who needed to be found before she disappeared. The words landed slowly, piece by piece, and I felt it then, that subtle alignment of something I had not connected before, a report, a file, a situation that had seemed routine at the time, necessary, justified. I had not asked questions, I had trusted the information I was given because that was how things worked, because hesitation had never been an option. You signed it, Lily said, and her voice did not rise, did not accuse, it simply stated the truth as she saw it, without ever seeing her face. And that was it. That was the fracture, the moment where everything I thought I understood began to shift, because I remembered that, not the details, not the outcome, but the action itself, the signature, the decision made in seconds, that had carried consequences I had never followed through to the end. I felt my pulse slow, heavy and deliberate, as the realization settled in, not fully formed yet, but enough to make something inside me tighten. That woman, Lily continued, and for the first time, her voice wavered just slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of what she was saying, was me. The words did not need emphasis. They did not need anything at all, because they landed exactly where they were meant to, direct and unavoidable, and for a moment, everything inside me went still, not confusion, not denial, something else, something closer to recognition, because suddenly the gaps in my memory were not empty anymore. They were filled with context I had never allowed myself to consider. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the past did not feel distant anymore. It felt immediate, connected, like it had always been leading to this moment whether I acknowledged it or not. You ran, I said, quietly, not as an accusation this time, but as an understanding, and she nodded once, slow, certain. I had no choice, she replied, and there was no anger in it now, only truth, steady and complete, and I realized then that she had not been running from the world. She had been running from something much closer, something far more personal, something that stood directly in front of her now, and for the first time, I understood exactly what that was. The truth did not hit me all at once, it settled in slowly, like something heavy finding its place after being held up for too long, and I could feel it in the way my chest tightened, not from panic, not from fear, but from something far more unfamiliar, something that felt like responsibility finally catching up to me. I had signed it, a name on a page, a decision made in under 10 seconds, and I had walked away from it without ever looking back, because that was how my world worked. Efficiency, distance, control. But standing here now, looking at her, at Lily, I realized what that distance had cost. You never checked, she said quietly, and there was no accusation in her voice, which made it worse, because anger I could respond to, anger I could contain. But this calm certainty, this quiet truth, left no space for defense. You never asked who I was, she continued, and I exhaled slowly, my gaze dropping for a fraction of a second before returning to hers, because she was right. I had not asked, I had not needed to, or at least that was what I told myself at the time. I trusted the information, I said, my voice steady but lower now, more deliberate, and she gave a small nod, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just acknowledging the words for what they were. Exactly, she replied, and that single word carried more weight than any argument could have, because it confirmed what I was only beginning to understand. This was never about intention, it was about consequence. I looked toward the boys again, Ethan and Noah, still watching, still quiet, and I realized something else, something that shifted the ground beneath everything I thought I knew. They had grown up without me, not because I had been taken from them, but because I had never been allowed near them, and the reason for that stood directly in front of me. You could have told me, I said, and the moment the words left my mouth, I knew how they sounded. Incomplete, insufficient. But they were the only ones I had. Lily's expression softened slightly, not with forgiveness, but with something closer to understanding, like she could see the gap between what I believed and what actually happened, and risk you finishing what you started? she asked, her voice still calm, still controlled. But now there was something else there, something protective, something that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with the two boys standing a few feet away. I felt that then, not as an attack, but as a reality I could not ignore. She had made a choice, not just to leave, but to protect, to build a life where they were safe from a version of me that I had never questioned until now. And for the first time, I saw that version clearly, not as a villain, not as something separate, but as a part of me that had existed without consequence until this moment. I ran a hand slowly along my jaw, grounding myself, forcing my thoughts into something coherent, because reacting was not enough, not here, not now. I would not have hurt you, I said, and this time it was not control speaking, it was belief, real and unfiltered, and Lily held my gaze for a long second before responding, her eyes steady, unshaken. You already did, she said softly, and there was no anger in it, no bitterness, just truth, quiet and complete, and that was the moment it fully settled. The realization that whatever I had been to her before, whatever I thought I represented, it had been replaced by something else entirely, something she had learned to live without, something she had protected her children from, and for the first time in a long time, I did not have a response, not one that would change anything, not one that would undo what had already been done. I just stood there, facing the consequence of a decision I had never even remembered making, and understanding, finally, why she had never come back. The music continued around us like nothing had changed, soft and elegant, the kind of sound that was designed to smooth over tension, but it did not reach me anymore. Not after what she had said, not after the quiet finality in her voice when she told me I had already hurt her, and I stood there for a moment longer than I should have. Not because I did not know what to do, but because for the first time in years, knowing what to do did not feel like enough. Lily shifted slightly, her attention returning to the boys, and the movement was small, almost unnoticeable. But it told me everything I needed to understand. Her priority had never been me. Not anymore, it was them. It had always been them, and I could not fault her for that, not when I finally understood what she had been protecting them from. I followed her gaze, watching as Ethan reached for her hand, small fingers wrapping around hers with a familiarity that made something tighten in my chest again. Not pain, not exactly, something closer to absence, like I was seeing a life that should have included me but never did. We are leaving, Lily said quietly, not as a threat, not as a challenge, just a decision already made, and she did not look at me when she said it, which somehow made it harder to accept. I took a step forward before I could stop myself, the instinct to close the distance stronger than the restraint I usually relied on. You are not walking away again, I said, and the words came out lower than I intended, not forceful, but firm, grounded in something deeper than control. Lily paused then, her shoulders still, her hand tightening slightly around Ethan's, and for a second, I thought she might turn back immediately, might respond with the same calm certainty she had shown all night, but instead, she stayed where she was, facing away from me, and that silence stretched just long enough to make me feel it, the weight of what I was asking, not just for her to stop, but for her to reconsider everything she had built without me. I am not running anymore, she said finally, her voice steady, carrying just enough to reach me without drawing attention from anyone else. I am choosing, and the distinction landed differently this time. Sharper, clearer, because it was not about fear, not anymore, it was about control, her control, something she had taken back the moment she left 5 years ago. I exhaled slowly, my hands still at my sides, forcing myself to stay where I was instead of reaching for something I had no right to claim, then choose to stay, I said, and this time there was no edge in my voice, no demand, just truth, because that was all I had left to offer. Lily turned then, slowly, deliberately, her eyes meeting mine again, and there was something new in them now, not softness, not forgiveness, but consideration, like she was weighing something she had already decided against something she did not expect. You do not get to ask that of me, she replied, and her tone was not harsh, just certain, grounded in a reality I could not argue with. I held her gaze, not looking away, not stepping back, because even if I had no right to ask, I still needed her to understand something I had only just begun to understand myself. Maybe not, I said quietly, but I am asking anyway, and the space between us shifted again. Not closing, not widening, just changing, because this was no longer about the past alone. It was about what came next, and neither of us knew yet what that would be. But for the first time since she had turned to leave, she did not move. She did not move, and that stillness said more than any answer could have, because Lily Carter had always been the kind of person who acted, who decided quickly when it mattered, and the fact that she was standing there now, not walking away, not pulling the boys with her, meant something had shifted, even if only slightly. I watched her closely, not the way I would watch a threat, but the way you watch something fragile, something that could disappear again if you pushed too hard. Ethan's hand was still in hers, Noah standing just a step behind, both of them quiet, observant, taking everything in without interrupting, and I realized then that they were not confused, not afraid. They were waiting for her, for whatever decision she would make next, because she was their certainty, not me, not yet. Lily's gaze stayed on mine, steady, searching, like she was measuring something she could not afford to misjudge. And for the first time, I understood that this was not about convincing her. It was about proving something I had never needed to prove before, something I had never even considered. You said you were not running. I spoke again, quieter this time, not to push but to hold the moment where it was. Then let me do the same. The words were simple, but they carried something new, something I was still learning how to hold on to, because this was not control, not authority. This was something closer to accountability, and it did not come naturally. Lily's expression softened just slightly, not enough to call it trust, but enough to show that she heard what I was actually saying, not the words themselves, but what was behind them, the difference between who I had been and who I was trying to be in this exact moment. You do not know how to stay, she said quietly, and there was no judgment in it, only observation, and that landed deeper than anything else she had said so far, because she was right. Staying had never been part of my world. I built things, controlled them, protected them from a distance, but I had never stayed in the way she meant. Never stayed when it required vulnerability instead of authority. I took a slow breath, grounding myself again, letting the truth of that settle instead of resisting it. Then I will learn, I answered, and this time there was no hesitation, no calculation, just a statement I was willing to stand behind, even if I did not yet know what it would cost. Lily studied me for a long second, her eyes searching for something, maybe weakness, maybe inconsistency, maybe the version of me she had run from. But whatever she was looking for, she did not find it, or at least not in the way she expected, because her grip on Ethan's hand loosened slightly, not releasing, but not holding as tightly either. A small change, almost invisible, but enough to matter. Noah shifted closer to her side, glancing between us with that same quiet awareness, and I saw it then, not just the resemblance, not just the connection, but the possibility, something fragile, uncertain, but real. Lily looked at them, then back at me, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something new, not trust, not yet, but something that could become it if handled carefully. One conversation, she said, and the words were measured, deliberate, like terms being set in place. No promises, no expectations. I nodded once immediately, because this was not a negotiation I intended to win. It was a chance I intended to keep. One conversation, I repeated, and for the first time since she had turned to leave. She did not look like she was about to disappear again. She simply stood there, still deciding, but no longer alone in that decision. We did not speak again inside the ballroom. Not after that, because some conversations do not belong in places filled with noise and strangers pretending not to see what is right in front of them. Lily glanced toward the exit, then back at me, a silent decision passing between us without needing to be spoken, and I nodded once, understanding what she was asking without her having to say it. We moved together, but not quite together. A careful distance maintained, the boys between us like a line. Neither of us was ready to cross yet. The night air outside felt colder than it should have, sharp against my skin, grounding in a way the inside had not been. The city stretched around us, lights reflecting off glass and steel, everything moving as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. Lily stopped near the edge of the sidewalk, just far enough from the entrance that we were no longer part of the event. Just people standing in the quiet space between decisions. Ethan and Noah stayed close to her, their eyes moving between us with that same steady awareness that felt far older than their years. and I realized then that whatever came next would not just shape my future, it would shape theirs too. Lily turned to face me fully, the distance still there, but no longer growing. "You have one conversation," she repeated, her voice calm, measured, like she was setting the terms of something fragile, something that could not afford to be handled carelessly. I nodded once. Slower this time, because I understood now what that meant. Not control, not negotiation, just truth, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. "Start with this," she said, and her eyes held mine, steady, unflinching. "Why did you never look back?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. Not accusation, not anger, just a truth she had been waiting to hear, and I felt it then, the shift, the moment where everything I had built around myself, every justification, every assumption, no longer held the same certainty it once did. I took a breath, slower than usual, because this was not a question I could answer the way I answered everything else, quickly, efficiently, without hesitation. This required something different, something I had never needed before, because I thought I understood what happened. I said, my voice quieter now, not from doubt, but from the realization of how incomplete that understanding had been. Lily did not react immediately, did not interrupt. She simply listened, and that alone made me continue. And, because in my world, looking back does not change the outcome, I added, the words sounding different now than they would have before, less like truth, more like something I had told myself to make it easier to move forward. Lily's gaze softened slightly, not with agreement, but with recognition, like she had expected that answer in some form. "That is where you were wrong," she said gently, and there was no harshness in it, no need for it, because the truth did not require force to be understood. I nodded once, accepting that without resistance, because she was right, and for the first time, I was not trying to argue against it. I was trying to understand it, really. Understand it. Not just for her, but for them. I looked at the boys again, at Ethan, at Noah, and something settled into place inside me. Not fully, not completely, but enough to know this was not a moment that would end when we walked away from it. This was the beginning of something I had never planned for, never prepared for, but could no longer ignore. I met Lily's eyes again, steady, certain in a way that felt different than before. Not control, not authority, something else entirely. "Then I will not make that mistake again," I said, and the words were not a promise, not yet, but they were not empty either, because for the first time, I understood what it meant to actually stay, and Lily studied me for a long second before giving a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but acknowledgement, and as the city moved around us, loud and alive and unaware, I realized something I had never considered before. Some truths do not destroy you when you find them, they change you, and whether that change matters depends entirely on what you choose to do next.